Man, that intro music always gets me fired up. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Most Accurate Podcast from 4for4 Fantasy Football. I'm John Paulsen. John Daigle is off this week, so I thought it'd be a good time to bring on a couple of my colleagues at 4for4, our director of DFS, TJ Hernandez, who you can find on Twitter at TJ Hernandez, and senior analyst and offensive line expert, Justin Edwards. You can find Justin on Twitter at Justin_Redwords. There's an R in front of Edwards there. For some reason, maybe Justin can explain that later on. Before we begin, I want to talk about the Underdog promo. Deposit $10 into a new Underdog account, and you'll receive a free 4for4 Pro or DFS subscription plus 100% bonus deposit match up to $100. You must use the promo code 4for4. This is a great way, if you don't already have an Underdog account, to get a free subscription to 4for4 on the cheap. Remember, the DFS subscription has everything that the Pro subscription has, except all the DFS content that TJ is in charge of. So go for the DFS subscription. Even if you don't play, you'll get some extra info there. And you must use promo code 4for4. So getting into the podcast today, the idea that sparked this conversation was a tweet that I saw from TJ talking about dead zone running backs. And those are running backs going in the 3rd to 6th round. So, TJ, you want to talk a little bit about what dead zone strategy and how you're approaching it this year?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, dead zone is a little bit of a misdirection there. I mean, you see it and you kind of think, I should be avoiding running backs at all costs in those rounds. And to an extent, that's been true. But really, it's more of a praise of wide receivers going in that range than it really is a knock on running backs. And a lot of the dead zone discussion has been birthed from best ball. So it doesn't always translate perfectly to redraft, obviously, because in best ball, we have no in-season management, where in redraft we can make up for our mistakes through trades and waiver wires. But the data does kind of help us give us a really good idea of how we should be constructing our rosters in terms of draft and where the most value is coming from. So a lot of this has come from old PPR best ball data. We've kind of shifted to a half PPR as our standard, both here at 4for4 and just kind of the bigger sites across the industry. But even with half PPR data, some of these dead zone ideas have rang true. So if we just look at average points or average points contributed to the team in rounds 1 and 2, running backs just blow away wide receivers. In rounds 3 through 6, we've seen wide receivers really jump out ahead of running backs. And then in the other single digit rounds 7 through 9, it kind of evens out. Going back to best ball, if we look at things like team advance rates or win rates, kind of the same thing. Positive win rates for the collective of running backs in the first 2 rounds, negative win rates for wide receivers in those first 2 rounds, and then it flips in rounds 3 through 6. And if we look at things such as league winners, again, I'm just going to use best ball as a primer here, those players that have had advance rates 10% over expectation, those are just like the top, call it 10 or 15 players over the last 2 years. Again, just using Underdog Best Ball Mania, we've seen in rounds 3 through 6, 0 running backs have hit that league winning threshold in that 3 through 6 range, where we've seen 8 wide receivers in that range. And going back to the first couple of rounds, we've seen dominant running backs come out of the first couple of rounds. And it kind of makes sense if we're thinking about how we're projecting running backs. Right now we have 12 to 14 15 running backs going in the first 2 rounds. So we get these huge runs on running backs in the first 2 rounds, and then teams still want to fill out their running back roster, right? So we end up with these guys that, sure, we can it's usually because we can project them for good volume if they're going in this 3 through 6 range, top 24 running backs. But they usually have a couple things working against them, whether it be age, injuries, bad offenses, and when we have multiple things working against our running backs, usually it tips the scales in that we want to be loading up on those wide receivers in that range. And John, you did your rankings review a couple of weeks ago, and you noted in the wide receiver article, wide receivers so deep, and it has been for so many years, that if we are able to nail down our running back in the first couple of rounds, or 2 running backs even in the first couple of rounds, then we can really just hammer wide receiver and come away with a beautiful looking team. Now, all that said, we should be adjusting this year by year. We should really be taking a note of what we think is going to happen in the year upcoming, not the years past. And I actually do think that this is a year where that quote-unquote dead zone actually does have a lot of fruit to bear. And this should all be fluid on how we're drafting, right? If we come away with, say, no running backs in the first couple of rounds, and for whatever reason, and you aren't somebody that is comfortable with a 0 running back team, by all means, draft running backs in these rounds, but I think we have to be extra diligent in deciding which running backs we really want to take stands on in these rounds. Whereas in the first couple of rounds, like, you could fall into some league winners at the position. In these middle rounds, it's tougher because, like I said, there's just so many question marks with so many of these guys.
That was a good outline of the dead zone approach and why it's called the dead zone. I kind of first heard the term coined from the 0 RB folks, and they tell you not to draft anybody in this range. And I'm not sure that the 0 RB folks should be trusted, so I'm always skeptical about that. So I question everything that they have to say. Getting into this, I think you outlined it pretty well. These are guys that have some warts, and this is true every year. There's the guys going 3rd through 6th round are interesting players, but they have some things working against them, and we'll get into that as we go player by player through these 4 rounds or so. So the thing that I noticed this year, though, is that these RB2 rankings these players are a little more intriguing to me than they were in years past. There are some players going in the 4th, 5th, 6th round who might see 20 touches a game, and I follow the volume. I follow touches. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but touches and fantasy points correlate pretty heavily. So we'll get into who those players are, and maybe some players in this range to avoid based on some red flags. And this is also one of the reasons we brought Justin on, because he's just finished his 3-part offensive line series, and he's going to get into the weeds on some of these offensive lines. More and more over the last, I would say, 5 years, I really started taking the offensive line into account when ranking these guys and trying to sort out, especially these players that are all kind of similar on a tier. If you have a really elite offensive line, that gives you a leg up, even if maybe you're not as talented as a player ahead of you that has a terrible offensive line. So that's something Justin's going to comment on. And then I also did a study, my free agency study, where I summed the free agent contracts in and out on the offensive line to see who has been investing in the offensive line, who might see a jump in offensive line quality. And that should better inform us as we start to draft this group. So let's just get right into it. Saquon Barkley is now going in the late 2nd round, but he'll slip to the 3rd round in some of these drafts. I think the key here, we'll give Justin a chance to talk, is that the offensive line for the Giants was so bad last year. Barkley was coming off of the ACL injury. He caught a lot of passes, but was not very efficient at running the ball. Do you think, Justin, that the offensive line for the Giants is improved enough? You have them ranked 29th in your rankings, but they've added 5 net players to this group. Do you think it's improved enough that we can take Barkley confidently in the late 2nd round?
Yeah, I think so. This is kind of a pessimistic view to rank him this low. It doesn't usually bear fruit when you just revamp the entire offensive line all at once, although it did happen in Buffalo a couple years ago. And interestingly enough, New York added that same offensive line coach this offseason. So the same guy who made it work with Buffalo a couple years ago is now in New York. They really do have a lot more talent in the room than they did last year. So, I mean, they could, if they coalesce, if they gel quickly, they could be an average unit. which would be leaps and bounds over the probably bottom 3 unit they've been for the last year or two.
Yeah, and if you're going from bottom of the league to mediocre, that's a huge boost for Barkley. I mean, that's huge. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be elite to really improve his outlook. TJ, you have any thoughts on Barkley?
Yeah, I mean, as a lifelong Bills fan, I was upset to see Brian Dable over in New York, but I think a coach, offensive guru like Dable is somebody that can really boost an offense. How he's going to implement Saquon into the offense is TBD, but we know Saquon can catch. We know he can handle a big workload if he can stay healthy. Obviously, been dealing with some injuries. The concern for me is just some of his advanced metrics just fell off an absolute cliff last year. He was tied for 41st in yards after contact per attempt, which is kind of a red flag. But again, dealing with injuries, comes back healthy. I think he is actually fairly priced at this, where he's going kind of fringe second, third round. And there's like a big chunk of these guys that, depending on your draft, can go at the end of the second round, beginning of the third, and a lot of them might fall into the like technically they're dead zone guys, but we have a really big chunk of guys here at this turn that I think are just fantastic picks.
Yeah, and you could start off with the running back in the first round, go receiver in the second, and might get one of these guys early in the third round, which is a pretty strong start. I was actually going to mention the same advanced stat. He was also, in terms of yards per contact per attempt, he was also 49th in out of 61 eligible backs in PFF rushing grade. Not great. Yeah, his advanced stats were not good, but I'm trying to chalk that up to just, coming back from the knee injury. He had an ACL, MCL tear, and maybe, at 25, he should be young enough to recover from this. I'm not like super optimistic about him, but I'm starting to warm to the idea. If you can get him at early third or near this 2-3 turn is pretty appealing. Especially
if he's your RB2. I think he's ideal as an RB2.
For sure. Leonard Fournette is the next guy I'd like to talk about. I'm just going to go through these in ADP order right now. Fournette, signed a big deal worth up to $24 million, 3-year deal from the Bucs. So it looks like they're committed to him. He's 27 years old. He was the RB5 prior to his ankle injury in week 15. He was averaging 92 total yards and 0.77 touchdowns. The touchdowns were great. It's a good offense, but the key to his Fournette, his scoring was his involvement in the passing game, and he led all running backs in targets with 77 through week 14. They did draft Rachaad White. They have one of the best offensive lines in the league, according to Justin. I think you ranked him 4th, Justin. The interesting thing here is how much does White. I don't think Gio Bernard's much of a threat anymore. He was basically kind of shuffled off to the side late last year. The question is White as a rookie. Really, I've seen some good pass catching stats from him from college. People are kind of talking him up, but as a rookie, do you guys think that he will, get Tom Brady's trust and enough to eat into Fournette's workload without an injury to Fournette? TJ, why don't you go first?
Yeah, that was actually the main point I was going to bring up on White is that Tom Brady is such a stickler for things like pass blocking. If there is even one small error, we're just going to see him shunned to the sideline. And with Fournette, I mean, you mentioned his passing game work, and this kind of reminds me of what I think could happen in Green Bay, where there's just so much passing work to go to the running backs. People are looking for the receivers to replace Devontae in Green Bay. In Tampa, Godwin is a pup candidate. We got word that Gronk is retiring, so people are saying, "Oh, look, let's go after Cameron Brate." Things like this. I think Leonard Fournette is just on track to be that target leader, like you mentioned, throughout the first half of the season until Godwin comes back. They have no reason to rush Godwin back. So if I miss out on a first-round running back, and for whatever reason I love like the hero running back type build, after someone like Aaron Jones, like I'm comfortable taking Fournette in the first 2 rounds if I don't think I'm going to come out with another running back for a few rounds and him just anchoring my team. I love Fournette this year.
Justin, with the offensive line real strong, I think one of the questions that I have ranking Barkley and Fournette is I don't know who I'd rather have. I think I'd rather have Fournette, and I'm just looking at my rankings right now. I've got Barkley one spot ahead, just projected. I think I'd rather have Fournette because the offensive line is as good. He's probably as good of a runner at this point. We don't know where Barkley's at with his knee. He seems like he's trusting it more. But do you have a take on Fournette versus Barkley, or just Fournette in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm on the same page. I think I'd rather have Fournette, kind of like what TJ was saying, Brady's not going to want a rookie back there until he can prove that he's good in pass protection and all the nuance of that. We saw what happened with Ronald Jones throughout the season, throughout last season. Fournette was pretty much out touching him 3-1 or something like that by the end of the year. The offensive line in general is super strong. They lost Kappa, Ali Marpet's gone. They brought in Shaq Mason for like a 5th rounder from New England, which was probably the steal of the offseason. So I think they're still in good shape. I think Fournette's going to carry the load again, and it's probably a better option than Barkley behind the Giants' offense in general.
Yeah, and Fournette catches passes too. Barkley catches passes, but this Tampa Bay offense is probably going to score more touchdowns. I think we can safely say that. So the next player that's going in this dead zone is Nick Chubb. I moved Chubb down. It wasn't like I didn't like him or anything like that, but this whole Deshaun Watson situation is just I can't be too optimistic about the Browns offense with Jacoby Brissett running things. So Chubb moved down as a result. I do think he is one of the best, if not the best, pure runners in the league. He's got serious competition for touches with Kareem Hunt, Dearness Johnson. He's got a great offensive line. Justin, you have him ranked 7th. But this Deshaun Watson situation is dicey. You could see a scenario where maybe the Browns go super run heavy and there's just tons of carries available for everybody. And he's always been one that got 18 plus, touches a game, but he doesn't have that 25, 30 touch upside with catches because he doesn't play a big role in the passing game. Justin, do you want to talk a little bit about the offensive line or maybe the backfield in general? And I just feel like the quarterback situation is kind of weighing him down.
Right. Yeah. Definitely makes it tough with not knowing who the quarterback's going to be, or if it's going to be Jacoby Brissett for 16 games or 8 games or 4 games or what have you. I do like this offensive line a lot. There are some issues with Jack Conklin, who didn't see the field much last year, and he's still not on the field during any of these OTAs or mini camps or whatever they're called in June. But I did look into the on-off splits with Conklin last year, and they're stark. Like Baker's completion percentage was 11% less with him off the field, which is huge. His yards per attempt were 2.6 lower with him off the field. The rushing yards before contact was like 0.2 yards per rush, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when it's 30 carries a game or 200 carries in a season. So they might end up being quite a bit lower than 7th if Jack Conklin doesn't see the field. I don't really have any takes on that depth chart. But, I mean, Hunt's still there, right?
Yep. Hunt's still there, and he's been kind of a trade rumor, guy all off season, but nothing's happened, and they're actually talking about extending him. I don't know if things have gotten serious in that front, but Chubb is. I would describe Chubb in the 3rd round as you're hitting a single, and he's not gonna cost you your league or anything like that, and he might end up winning it for you if there's an injury to Hunt or something, or maybe Deshaun Watson is able to play. I don't know. TJ, any thoughts on this backfield?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's always concerned me about Chubb and the reason I've always just been somewhat low on him is obviously isn't going to give you a ton in the passing game. And with Hunt there, any player that doesn't have a realistic chance at the overwhelming majority of the touches in his backfield is going to give me a reason for concern. He only had 6 games last year where he saw 2/3 or more of the backfield touches. Now, oftentimes that still translates to 18 or 19 touches, but as you mentioned, John, that 25 touch upside is just almost never there for him without an injury. And with the concerns about the offense probably most likely headed in the wrong direction out of this group at the 2-3 turn, probably my least favorite. Now, with that said, I think leading the league in rushing yards is very well within his range of outcomes. How much does that translate into scores and actual, huge fantasy upside? I'm not sure, but I agree. Probably is the best pure runner. Not a guy that I'm taking off my board by any means, but out of this group, I'd prefer to get him when he falls a few spots past ADP than just blindly snagging him at the turn just because I'm void of running back at that point.
Yeah, I think Chubb is the list of guys we're going to talk about today, he's like the most fun for me to watch. I think he's the most talented player, and he has a great offensive line, so it's hard to pass him up in the third round. I mean, I was taking him in the second round some last year, but this you just can't get over the fact that this offense is going to be worse if it goes from Baker Mayfield to Jacoby Brissett as the starter for the majority of the season. Javonte Williams, next player up. I was ranking him in the top 8 or so when it looked like Melvin Gordon was going to move on. His advanced stats are great. He's a really fun player to watch as well. But I had to move him down quite a bit once Gordon re-signed. I just don't see him seeing enough touches relative to the rest of the players, even going below him here. Next 2 guys, especially, and 3 of the next 4, 4 of the next 5, 5 of the next 6 going after him. I don't see him getting the touches. The good news is that Russell Wilson is coming in. This offense is going to be better overall. I don't know about this offensive line though, Justin. What are your thoughts on their offseason so far?
Pretty middle of the road. They kind of shed a couple like replacement level players, and then they went and got Billy Turner from Green Bay, who's more or less a replacement level player as well. So they're just kind of middle of the road. And during my studies on this, if you're in that middle pack, it's really you're not doing much to boost or hinder your fantasy options. So I don't think there's much to look at there.
Yeah, he averaged 14.4 touches per game as a rookie, ninth in yards after contact per carry, first in broken tackles per carry. But Gordon was no slouch. He was 16th and 6th in those metrics, respectively. TJ, Javonte Williams in the third round. Are you in on that?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious concerns that you mentioned are there. I've kind of warmed to Javonte. I've been doing a ton of best ball drafts since even before the NFL draft. But from the Melvin Gordon signing on, pretty much every week, Javonte Williams' ADP has dropped 1 to 2 spots. So that is obviously going to make me like a player a lot more if he keeps getting cheaper. The bull arguments for Javonte Williams is that Melvin was out there for a long time before the Broncos re-signed him. They only gave him $2.5 million. This is a completely new staff with a completely new offense. So I think that projecting exactly what they did last year might be a little short-sighted. There's a chance that Javonte is just so good that this new staff sees it after the first couple of games and does allow that flip that we thought was going to happen last year to actually happen. And Melvin Gordon isn't quite at that vaunted 30-year window, but he is in his age 29 season. So I could see a scenario where you draft Javonte here, you have a few weeks of frustration, and then this offense is just so good with him and Russ on the field together that he just kind of pulls away. But that is obviously an unknown. But again, with his ADP continuing to slip, I've actually warmed on him quite a bit.
Yeah, Javonte. Go ahead, Justin.
What do you guys think about Melvin and like the end of the 9th?
I'm drafting every Bronco I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I look at this like if you just project what they did last year, they probably should both be ranked in the low 20s. Mm-hmm. I am projecting a shift to Javonte, but I just don't have that confidence with. I mean, Melvin Gordon's talented still. He's still running the ball well, and the fact that they brought him back just indicates that they don't want to just totally go bell cow with Javonte. But I think he has. I think he's got top 5 upside if anything were to happen to Melvin, pretty easily. So, and then Gordon in the 9th, I don't know. Like, I think that's a pretty talented player to get at that point in the draft. But I think I'm looking at receivers at that point or tight ends at that point in the draft.
Yeah, this feels like a situation where even if at the end of the year, say it comes out to like a 60-40 split in Javonte's favor, that there could and probably will be games where Javonte's just playing so well that he has like a 90% touch share in random weeks just because things are going so well. So there's always the hot hand aspect, I think.
Let's move on to another player that I can't really believe is going in the third round, but at the same time, I understand why. James Conner, he's the 15th running back off the board. And I think he should be going 3 spots higher. Chase Edmonds is out of the way. His primary competition for touches is the newly signed Darrell Williams, who I don't think is going to have as big a role with Arizona as he did with Kansas City. Basically, Connor is better than Darrell Williams in every aspect of football, in my opinion, looking at the advanced stats there. And then, Benjamin, and then 6th-round pick Keontae Ingram. In the 5 games that Edmonds missed last year, Connor averaged 20.8 touches, including 5 catches per game for 20.7 fantasy points per game. He was a touchdown monster and should continue to be a touchdown monster. Maybe a kind of an unexciting, unsexy pick in the 3rd round, but I think, like we were talking about Chubb being a single, I think you're hitting a double if you get Connor in the 3rd round. Who wants to kick off Connor? Who wants to tell me I'm wrong?
I don't know if I want to tell you you're wrong, but I am a little worried about all of those touchdowns. That 18 touchdowns is so many to depend on, and without a ton of usage. I mean, he had 239 touches, which is not light, but then Najee had 10 touchdowns on almost 400 touches. I don't know. It feels like there's some regression with Connor. And
that's fair. He finished RB7 though. So, you don't need all of those to get to that level. What do you think of Connor in this Arizona offense, TJ?
Yeah, so Connor specifically, I just started my series on touchdown regression and expected touchdowns, and he did have the highest touchdown rate in the league. He scored on 7.5% of his opportunities, which is astronomical. Usually we're around 3.5% for a running back. But if we look at his expected touchdowns, sure, he scored 18, but he was still expected around 10 or 11. So he was expected to score the 7th most touchdowns based on his usage and where that usage happened. So he can still see a drop off in touchdowns, go back to a normal touchdown rate, and still pay off his ADP if we regress him back to that 10 or 11 touchdowns that he was expected to score last year, he would have finished as the RB15. So basically exactly where he's going. So we know his upside in this offense. We saw it last year. So obviously counting on him to replicate that is going to be a little bit tough. But I think out of players you're drafting from him on, I think the downside is actually a lot less than any of these players. So I think Connor's fairly priced. The way I've been drafting, I usually have a running back or 2 before him, so he's kind of just I've kind of shunned him in favor of some wide receivers or a Kyle Pitts that I love in this area. But if you find yourself in a pickle, I don't think you're gonna lose a lot by drafting James Conner right here.
Yeah, I think you could draft a receiver or a tight end perhaps in the 2nd round after drafting running back in the 1st, and you can get James Conner in the 3rd, and I think that's a really strong start. The other issue is that your expected expected number of touchdowns was based on a season where Chase Edmonds played a lot and took a lot of his touches. A lot of Connor's touches are going to be freed, or those are going to go to Connor now. And I think even though his maybe number of touchdowns he scored will be less, it might increase. His expected might actually increase based on the number of touches he's getting. So that's an interesting kind of quandary. The offensive line's not great. You have him 25th, Justin. So that's one of those issues. But he catches the ball. He's a dual threat, so it's not as big of an issue for me. Ezekiel Elliott is another intriguing name. We don't usually see him going 3rd, 4th round. I think he's going the 4th round right now. They did have some offensive line losses. Maybe you can speak to that, Justin, but they have good depth waiting in the wings to kind of pick up the pieces. Is he past his prime? I don't know. I saw some good advanced stats of his prior to the injury. He did sprain his knee, and that sort of kind of sunk his value heading into the second half of the season. Justin, you want to speak on the offensive line losses and whether or not this unit's going to be able to absorb them?
Yeah, for sure. This was one of the deepest units in the league. Them and division mates Philadelphia are always paying attention to their offensive line. They lost Lyle Collins, who's got a ton of run the last few seasons because the Cowboys are always dealing with offensive line injuries, particularly Tyron Smith. I forgot Tyron Smith's name from it. But when Tyron Smith is on the field, he's very possibly the best lineman in the league. They have Zach Martin, who's possibly the best guard in the league. So it's hard to knock him down too much just from losing a couple guys. But yeah, I am kind of worried for them if they do keep dealing with these injuries. They're all fine now, but they have a history of guys going down for half a season at a time. So we'll see. It's just bad luck, I assume, unless it's the turf in Dallas.
Yeah, TJ Elliott, in his first few games, he had a tough tough game against the Bucks, 39 total yards, but he had 97 yards and a score against the Chargers, 116 total yards and 2 touchdowns against the Eagles, 143 yards and a touchdown against the Panthers in week 4, and that included a 47-yard run. Kind of questioning whether or not he's really washed or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's the third longest of his career. He had 112 total yards and 2 touchdowns in week 5, and then 119 total yards in week 6. And after the bye, he didn't gain more than 76 total yards in a game until week 18. It was 19.7 touches prior to the bye, 15.1 touches after the bye. Yards per carry went from 5.11 to 3.55. And Dallas wasn't. I asked you offline, what was Dallas doing? Because Pollard's touches didn't really spike when they started ratcheting back Elliott. So what are we going to see from this backfield this year with a healthy Elliott?
Yeah, and what we talked about was that we saw that that neutral pass rate just absolutely soar. I mean, we've seen multiple seasons now where Pollard has been more efficient than Zeke. Last year, Pollard was 8th in yards after contact per attempt. Zeke was 21st. The year before, tons of efficiency metrics pointed towards Pollard. And the argument that I would have for Pollard really eating into Zeke's workload this year is that this is just an offense that's absolutely in flux. They're now without Amari Cooper. They have Gallup, who can be who is a pup candidate to start the season. So this is an offense that could be really looking for a spark. I mean, we hear the offseason reports of every single running back that knows how to catch passes. Oh, now they're lining up in the slot. With Pollard, I think there probably is something to that, just because their weapons are going to be depleted from what they had last year. I know they drafted Tolbert. They have James Washington. A lot of people like Schultz this year, but I think just from a having playmakers on the field standpoint, we could see a lot more Pollard this year, and it feels like Zeke is 35 years old, but he's only going to his age 27 season. But you mentioned that second half decline last year, of course, although playing with injuries. We've just consistently seen Pollard smash Zeke in efficiency metrics for multiple years now. So I think Zeke probably has. I think there's enough concern to say he has a lot of downside, even at his ADP right now.
Yeah, pick 39 is just not used to seeing him available at that point in the draft. I don't think it's ever happened, honestly. So he's an intriguing player if he's fully healthy, and it seems like he is. We'll see. Travis Etienne is the next player on the list to talk about. This is a very intriguing situation, given the new regime in Jacksonville. We have James Robinson coming off of an Achilles injury, which has submarined more than a few running backs' careers over the years, although it sounds like he's not going to be ready for camp, but might be ready for week 1. Adam Hutchinson, our injury expert, does wonder if Robinson is the type of back that's going to kind of be sapped of what athleticism he was. He's not like the greatest athlete in the world as it is, but he's a really crafty runner and all that. But he wonders if maybe that whatever burst he did have is going to be gone with the Achilles injury. And then Etienne has this reputation for being just this pass catcher, but I believe he had 2 really good seasons of 1,500 plus rushing yards, if I'm remembering correctly, in college prior to his final season. And he's not like this 190-pound back either. He's listed at over 200 pounds and has a 3-down ability, I think. So offensive line seems like it's maybe mediocre. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, pretty mediocre. They shuffled a lot up there. They were kind of middle of the road in most metrics last year, and then kind of did like one-for-one replacements of Andrew Norwell going to Washington and Brandon Scherf coming from Washington. Brandon Linder retired kind of surprisingly. They did get a guy, Luke Fortner, in the 3rd round from Kentucky, so he should fill that void if he wins the job during training camp. But yeah, kind of the same with who were we talking about earlier with Denver. It's just middle of the road, probably shouldn't affect it too much.
Yeah, the interesting thing with just looking at the Football Outsider stats is that they're 13th. They were 13th in rushing yards, offensive line. I'm sorry, adjusted line yards, 13th, and then they were 32nd in adjusted sack rate, which is no, I'm sorry, not 32nd, 10th in adjusted sack rate. I was reading the wrong column there. So I guess it's not as weird as I thought. That's actually not a bad offensive line as of last year. So we'll see if that carries over with the new regime. TJ, any thoughts on this James Robinson situation as it relates to Etienne? I mean, Etienne's coming off his own serious injury, but
Yeah.
seems to be further ahead.
Yeah, and Etienne's injury was, I mean, it was before the season. He's going to have a full calendar year for before the season starts to get healthy and should be at 100%, where James Robinson's happened late in the year. I mean, even last year when Etienne was a rookie and we knew James Robinson was completely healthy, Etienne was going 56th overall as a rookie before he got hurt. Now we don't even know if James Robinson is going to start the season. Etienne's only up 15 ADP spots from last year. And these are the kind of offenses I love investing in. Doug Peterson's now there as a head coach. We have a quarterback who was being hailed as the best prospect since Andrew Luck. Etienne is the only running back taken in the first round last year. They upgraded their wide receivers with Christian Kirk. I think with Christian Kirk and Marvin Jones spreading the field out, and then with Etienne and Laviska Shenault, doing a lot of unique stuff underneath, with Doug Peterson calling plays, he led Carson Wentz to a almost MVP year in Carson Wentz's second year. This is an offense that I just want pieces of, and I think Etienne could be a Kamara, DeAndre Swift type player. And if we rewind and get we take away the Urban Meyer fiasco and we have this offense in the second year, I think all of these guys are going a couple rounds early. I think Etienne's like a second or third round pick if he doesn't if we're not coming off this debacle of a Jaguar season. So I think he's one of the better dead zone running back values in a player that just has tremendous upside. As you mentioned, John, he could just do so many things as a running back. Versus his versatility is insane. So I actually like him in the Jaguars a lot.
Yeah, I just looked it up. 1,614 yards in 2019 as a rusher, 1,658 yards in 2018 as a rusher, and then he really picked up the passing game involvement as a senior. 48 catches, 588 yards, while adding 914 yards on the ground. He had 70 touchdowns in college. Just rushing touchdowns, 78 total touchdowns. So he's a pretty exciting player. And with the regime change there and an up-and-coming quarterback and a decent offensive line, he's extremely intriguing as well. I guess this Elliott versus Etienne question is going to be something to watch over the summer. Who's going to go with the proven talent and who's going to go with the guy that has some upside, but we don't know about the quote-unquote RB1 there, James Robinson. Talking about James Robinson with an Achilles tear, we're moving on to the next player, Achilles tear, call him Cam Achilles tear Akers. Came back early. This is all we talk about with Cam Akers is the Achilles tear. Like, is he going to be – he was really good as a rookie. Like, his rushing grades are great. Advanced stats are pretty good. And then came back to try to help his team win a Super Bowl, and it was brutal in terms of his efficiency. Now, he, did what he needed to do, got his 2 or 3 yards a carry, but that was basically it. I mean, it was under 2 yards per carry when you count that first game back. And, the offensive line looks good. Justin, you can comment on that. They're 8th in your rankings. And then it does appear that they do want – I mean, I'm not really worried about, Darrell Henderson. I think he's a good player, but it doesn't seem like they want Henderson to have a huge role in this offense. They want to feed Akers based on what they did with him coming back from injury last year. So – he's going in the 4th round. Is he a value there, Justin, or what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not worried about Darrell Henderson either. But it was stark how unexplosive he was when he came back, and maybe he was pushing it. But you think they would have not let him on the field if they thought he was still injured. So maybe it was just a blip, that whole playoff run. Clearly they did fine without his explosiveness. They still went to and won the Super Bowl. But yeah, it's I don't know if I would like a lot of Cam Akers on my teams, but I mean, if he hits in this explosive offense with a great offensive line, I mean, he could be a top 12 running back. I just wouldn't put all my chips in that basket, I don't think.
Yeah, the interesting thing with the Akers is that Henderson is going pick 140. Yeah. So you could have him in the 12th round. I mean, you don't usually handcuff your own guys, but Henderson we saw posted fringe RB1, high end RB2 numbers when he was a starter. And if you're worried about Akers' Achilles, you could draft both and lock up one of the best running back and one of the best offenses in the league. TJ, how worried are you about Akers? Do you think that he's a value in the 4th, or would you prefer to go another direction?
I think this is kind of where it starts to fall off pretty hard for me. And if I'm in a position where I'm really scrambling for running back, I think some guys that are coming up in the later rounds, like especially like 2 or 3 rounds later, I'd rather invest in. And the gap between him and Darrell Henderson is so wide that I think Henderson probably has some standalone value just because of how ineffective Akers was late in the season. Now, obviously, he's going to have a lot more time to recover from his injury. He just could come back as the rookie he was. But with that massive gap and with how good Darrell Henderson was when he was given the opportunity, I think I'd rather, if I'm going to want pieces of this offense, I think I'd rather just take that 12th rounder on Henderson.
Akers, the working in his favor is that he's really young, and apparently he's been working really hard this offseason. I mean, you hear all that kind of, nonsense in the offseason, but apparently he hasn't taken much of a break and is working his way back. So I'm rooting for him. The Achilles tear is really tough. Another really intriguing player coming up here, and this is a guy that's moved up a little bit in my rankings due to the offensive line. Justin, you can comment on this, but Breece Hall, they really made some good moves with the Jets offensive line, but it's still the Jets. It's hard to get over this Jets offense being so bad for so long. Zach Wilson didn't really repair that issue last year, but they do have a ton of talent now at the receiving core. Wilson has upside as a quarterback, and now they've added Breece Hall. A little surprising that they did, but Michael Carter was good last year, but not bell cow type good. So my assumption here is that he's going to come in and lead this backfield in touches, but Carter will be involved. There probably will be some sort of a split or committee here. So I'm trying not to get too excited about Breece Hall. But with this offensive line, are we going to see an uptick in their rushing efficiency and perhaps rushing touchdowns, Justin?
I think it's very, very possible. They lost Morgan Moses, who is probably one of the weaker pieces on their line. They added Laken Tomlinson from the 49ers, who played with Saleh a couple of years ago, although the other side of the ball. And really, they're getting a first-rounder back in Mekhi Becton, presumably. The story with Becton is odd. He's missed so much time in his 2 years. He never got back on the field after an injury last year because he was dealing with weight problems, which is always a red flag for a professional athlete when you can't even play because you're so overweight. But he's incredible when he's on the field. So we'll see. This could be a great line, like a top 10, maybe a top 5 line, but it really hinges on Becton and not having to put a replacement level or below replacement level tackle on the left side of Zach Wilson.
And how do you see this backfield splitting, TJ? Do you think that Carter is going to be much of a factor, or is it going to be mostly Hall?
I think they probably go into the season, given Breece Hall's draft capital, giving him all the opportunity in the world to be the guy. The issue here is Carter was decent last year, like you said, but they also have the second hardest schedule for the first half of the season, and that's not looking at last year's data. That's looking at projected win totals from DraftKings. If we take the average win totals for their opponents over those first 9 weeks, they have the second hardest schedule. So the issue is, obviously, we want very positive game scripts for our running backs. The Jets just might not be in that situation very often, and if they do struggle against this very hard schedule, there's a chance that Breece Hall just isn't able to get his feet under him in his rookie season. And if that happens, I think it can kind of evolve more into a timeshare as the season progresses. So that's the one thing that concerns me. I mean, I think this whole offense gets a little bit of a mulligan. Last year was Mike LaFleur's first year as an offensive coordinator. Wilson was a rookie. He missed some time. Their top 2 receivers missed a combined 14 games. So I still don't think we know exactly what this offense can be. I think the upside is definitely there. But I think they could have some really tough growing pains to start the year.
Yeah, I think last year I was preaching that these aren't your father's Jets. Mm-hmm. There's a new regime in town. We can't hold the previous years against this group, but they didn't make much of a leap at all. And that's now I'm soured on them. It takes 1 year and then I'm out. I don't think I'm out, but Breece Hall is, I think the workload split. If he's getting 65-70%, then he probably should be going earlier. If he's getting 55-60, then that's about right where he's going. So we'll see. The next name is David Montgomery, and this is a funny one because I ranked him fairly high in my initial set of rankings. he's got back-to-back seasons with 20 plus touches on average, and he's going in the 5th round. I'm just thinking, I don't remember a time when there's a player this young going in the 5th round that had 20 plus touches on average, back-to-back seasons, and the team didn't add anybody else at running back that's going to threaten him. It's just this offensive line, Justin. It's bad. It's really
it's not
really,
not good. Yeah.
It's not good. You've got them ranked 32nd. They also lost. I mean, they lost player. You could talk about that.
Yeah.
There is you could, as Chris Allen likes to say, you could tell yourself a story about players, and there is definitely just a volume play here with him going as late as he's going. You could see him finishing RB15 or RB10 fairly easily if he has a little bit of touchdown luck, or the offense is a little bit better than we think it's going to be. But maybe speak to that offensive line and what your issues are with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm with you. I mean, I don't see a way that he's not getting a huge percentage of the backfield touches, but this line is, it's an issue. Sports Info Solutions has a hit at line percentage metric, which is pretty interesting. The Bears led the league. Maybe that's not the best way to say it. We're last in the league at their running backs getting hit at the line of scrimmage, 44% of their runs. And then they lost their most important piece in James Daniels, who went to Pittsburgh. So that's a bummer. And right now is it the right guard? Yeah, the right guard, their camp battle right now is between their 6th and 7th round picks as to who will be starting at right guard. So yeah, they were pretty miserable last year, and then they lost their best piece. So I'm not confident.
Tough. Yeah, and then you have Justin Fields at quarterback, perhaps stealing some rushing touchdowns, but he might help the yards per carry, just being a rushing threat if they are running the right types of plays. TJ, any thoughts on this Bears running game?
Yeah, I mean, if we remember last year, for the first half of the season, for whatever reason, they just weren't letting Justin Fields run. After like week 9 or so, they finally did, and that's when we started seeing some of these 13 rush attempts, 14 rush attempts, even a 10 rush attempt game from David Montgomery. So there's a little bit of evidence there that he could see his touches fall off. Now, he did make up for that with targets quite a few times, but there's obviously concern there with Fields, and as you guys talked about with the offensive line and the potential of the offense, like he's just one of those players that we see every year where they finish as RB 16, 17 or whatever, but their usable or game-winning weeks are just few and far between. Like they're just going to accumulate those end-of-season points just through attrition, but from a week-to-week basis, they just really aren't. They're giving you like baseline fantasy points, and I think that's kind of what David Montgomery is going to be this year.
All right, the next player in ADP is J.K. Dobbins, and I think this is kind of a similar situation to maybe Javonte Williams, or he's a really talented player. We would like him in a lead sort of role, but he's not in that situation. They are going to likely go extremely run heavy this year, the Ravens, but he's coming off of a knee injury. So is Gus Edwards. They've already talking about limiting both players at the start of the season, which doesn't really, appeal to people trying to draft him. I think, maybe early in the offseason, he was going in the, top 15. Mm-hmm. And he's started to fall. And I think it's got a lot to do with the situation with the backfield in terms of the split and his knee injury in general and just lack of receiving. He's now going pick 56, running back 21. So he's available in the 5th round. Any thoughts on Dobbins, TJ?
Yeah, the more I really dive into this offense and start, getting into high volume drafts, the more I feel like the only players I'm targeting on Baltimore are Lamar and Mark Andrews, and that even extends out to Rashad Bateman. I just think Andrews is going to account for such huge target share. Neither of these running backs are going to catch a ton of passes. We know Lamar is going to be an obvious threat near the goal line, and Gus Edwards. I mean, even if they are both, if they do both start the season, Gus Edwards is going to vulture some touchdowns. So we have like a true, if you include Lamar Jackson, a true 3-headed monster in the backfield in terms of both yardage and touchdown upside. So I have serious concerns about this backfield, and even with J.K. Dobbins' ADP slipping, I mean, he's just like smack dab in the middle of this really, really gross group with David Montgomery, J.K. Dobbins, and then a couple other guys we haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah, I have him ranked 27th, and he's going up the board 21st. So that's tough. Any thoughts on the offensive line? It's kind of a mediocre group, right, Justin?
Yeah, pretty mediocre. They dealt with another retirement in Alejandro Villanueva a year after another high-profile guy retired that I can't think of. But they filled his shoes with Morgan Moses, which is all right, and then they got Tyler Linderbaum in the first round. Yeah, they're pretty middle of the road, honestly.
So we're running a little bit long, which is okay because this is an important discussion, and it's also I like picking your brains about these rankings, and maybe it's helping me sort my rankings out a little bit. But we're going to skip Josh Jacobs because I don't want to talk about Josh Jacobs. I don't want to draft Josh Jacobs, and I don't want any part of him.
That's fair.
I agree.
But another player that is surprisingly available where he is Antonio Gibson. I understand sort of why. But I think this is his ADP is sort of a reflection of maybe the depth at the position because was basically a fringe RB1 last year. And yes, they did draft a running back, and J.D. McKissick came back. I mean, he was a guy that when McKissick moved, was signed almost signed with the Bills. Gibson was just like Javonte entering the top 10 conversation, maybe top 8. But now we have Ron Rivera talking about Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams. Yeah. He's reminiscing about those days. But Gibson has been an 18, 19 touch player his career and has really been pretty good, all things considered. They have a good offensive line. Justin, any thoughts on the changes that they made?
Yeah, I mean, they've got a fringe like top 10 unit there. I don't think that's going to negatively impact Gibson or Brian Robinson, I guess, if he is really going to see the field as much as Ron Rivera is saying. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been taking a lot of Antonio Gibson, but I really like him at his ADP. I think it's kind of being forced down by Carson Wentz and how terrible he looks last year. But I mean, Jonathan Taylor had a pretty decent 2021 with Carson Wentz. Not that they're the same player, but I think Gibson will have plenty of opportunities to make up this ADP here.
Yeah, and we're talking 6th round for Gibson. To me, it's really late to be able to get a guy his youth and then his production. I mean, I understand that Brian Robinson is there and that he might steal some carries, and that if this Jonathan Stewart, D'Angelo Williams fever dream comes back, and then you have J.D. McKissick catching passes, it's really going to eat into Gibson's touches. But TJ, what's your feel on this? Do you think that Gibson is going to continue to see 16 to 18 touches per game, or do you think he's going to be more of a 12 to 14, 12 to 16 type guy?
Yeah, I think he could fall into that 14, 15 range. And when we're talking about players, I mean, we always have to think about opportunity costs. And the next two guys in ADP, I'm taking 100 out of 100 times over Antonio Gibson. I mean, I think one of the things Ron Rivera is very good at is misusing his players, and I think he's going to be he has lots of opportunity to do that this year with McKissick, with the rookie Brian Robinson. I believe the coach speak. I mean, even Curtis Samuel. I mean, Ron Rivera didn't use him in this way when they were together, but we've seen when Samuel's healthy, he can be used as kind of a slash running back type player. So even he could get thrown into the mix. So yeah, I think this could be an absolute nightmare. And because the guy's going after him, I'm passing on him every single time this year.
So let's talk about some of those guys going after him. And this is a fun one because Elijah Mitchell, I wrote a big scribe in the waiver wire watch last year after week 1 saying, put all your money on Mitchell and Fab, and you're going to have a starter the rest of the year. And that sort of worked out. Anytime he was healthy, he was seeing the vast majority of the touches. I think this whole Kyle Shanahanigans thing is way overblown. He picked Mostert as his starter, and Mostert, whenever he was healthy, was seeing the vast majority of the carries. And once Mostert went down, that player became Mitchell. And yes, he was in and out of the lineup with some injuries, and that caused some, chaos. But anytime there's chaos in the San Francisco backfield, it's due to injury. It's not due to, we're going to play Jeff Wilson now, or we're going to feed Michael or Hasty now, or whatever. And they did add Tyrion Davis-Price, who reportedly is going to be a top 2 option for them. They're thinking that that's going to be a 1-2 punch with Mitchell, which is interesting. The offensive line seems like it's taken a step back. Justin, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I have them ranked 13th, which is actually probably optimistic as it is. Uh, Alex Mack retired, I think, near the end of March, or was that more recently? Well, this spring, the center retired. They let Laken Tomlinson go to New York to play with Robert Saleh, and they didn't do anything but add a fourth rounder in the draft. So it's pretty net negative movement there. The reason they're even this high is just because of how much I like Trent Williams. He might be the best offensive lineman in the league, and he'll do a lot to anchor the left side of the line. But yeah, they could easily fall far outside of this ranking if they don't gel with, kind of some replacement level backup interior linemen. So we'll see.
So the question is, do we have confidence in Kyle Shanahan coaching up this line? Offensive line coaches there coaching up this line. 18.8 carries, 1.7 receptions per game when he was healthy. Is Mitchell one of these players, TJ, that you're taking over Gibson for sure?
Yeah, every single time. And the Shanahan argument, like the huge flaw in the Shanahan argument is that his running back by committee is end of season numbers. The thing that leaves out is if we look at it a game by game basis, he almost always prefers to have a running back carry the load on a per game basis. He's just had a lot of trouble either keeping those guys healthy for the most part since his time with San Francisco. And the thing that doesn't take into account is there's almost no other play caller. Like the only one I could think of is Sean Payton that involves his running backs at such a high rate as Shanahan. So even if there is a time split, like the pie is so much bigger in a Shanahan offense. And we saw just as early as last year how easily a running back with draft capital can fall out of favor. Like Trey Sermon was just straight up not even suiting up last year because of how bad he was. And I don't know if Tyron Davis-Price is going to be that guy, but if we're going to be talking about concerns of Elijah Mitchell losing carries, who was top 10 in yards after contact per attempt last year, it's going to be either to Debo or to even Trey Lance. But I think Elijah Mitchell is on the field as long as he's healthy, easily 80-90% of snaps. So I'm scooping up Mitchell every time here.
Yeah, Mitchell, like, there's nothing vulnerable about his performance last year. Like he had 4.65 yards per carry, he had the fifth highest yards per after contact per attempt per Pro Football Reference, 4.3 speed, which is what Mostert had, and you can see that's what Shanahan sort of gravitates to. But they might use Davis Price now in a little bit more of a complement to try to keep Mitchell healthy, and maybe you don't see 18.8 carries, but maybe you're seeing 16.8 carries and a catch or two. But still, that'll be a good value in the 6th round. I mean, if you can get Elijah Mitchell as your RB2 in the 6th round, I think you're winning. Yep. And you wrote, Justin, for more info on Mitchell. You said that he was the best dead zone running back in the league.
Yeah, I'm definitely on board with Mitchell this year. I mean, just to repeat what you guys were saying, the Shanahanisms.
Shanahanigans?
Shanahanigans. That's kind of overblown, and I touched on that as well in the article. But it's mostly injuries, and you can look at the end of your numbers and go, oh, it's a different running back every year. Like, yeah, but it's either 30-year-old Carlos Hyde or someone who was forced in as a rotation back because of an injury, or Elijah Mitchell. Even though he missed 6 games, he still was the workhorse when he was there. So yeah, I'm definitely aiming for Mitchell in this dead zone anytime I can get him.
And if you do draft him as your RB2, you should just plan on him missing some games. So if you could pick up some other starts elsewhere, you got to be paying attention because he's probably not going to play 17 games this year. That sort of takes us out of the dead zone, and there are a few players that I wanted to pick your brains about that are like names. I'm like, oh, that's interesting that he's going that late. Chase Edmonds is one. Miami paid him a lot of money, and a lot more money than Sony Michel or Raheem Mostert. The offensive line, it looks to me, Justin's improved. They've added a couple of pieces, big money, invested in that offensive line. You get Edmonds in there, and then they do sort of take the wind out of his sails by signing Mostert and then signing Michel. But Edmonds is easily the best pass catcher of that group, and he's a pretty good runner in the zone system, I think. So he's going, where's he going? Pick 113. What do we think about this with that offensive line, Justin?
I think that's a fair price there. They definitely added a ton of big name pieces of the offensive line. Teron Armstead from New Orleans and Connor Williams from Dallas. Those are two great players. Armstead has had a long history of issues with staying on the field. And Connor Williams might be moved over to center, which is kind of awkward because he's, as far as I can tell, he's never taken a snap at center through his NFL or college career, which was kind of awkward. So that's why they're still kind of down here in the low 20s range for me. But I mean, maybe Connor Williams is an incredible center and it'll boost the entire line. But yeah, they're better than they left off last season, I think 31st or 32nd. So definitely better than being the worst line in the league.
We were just talking about Kyle Shanahan and his OC. It's Mike McDaniel, I believe, is the OC. He's now the head coach of the Dolphins, so we might see a big jump in offensive efficiency if he's as smart as he seems. He's kind of a nerdy type, analytics type. So, TJ, any thoughts on the Miami offense or backfield?
Yeah, I haven't really decided how I feel about this offense as a whole. I mean, obviously bringing Tyreek over, like what leap is Tua going to make? Like when I look at Mostert and Michelle, they are guys that have been good in spurts. Michelle notably late last year. Mostert's had some nice games with the 49ers, but if there is a running back following the money that is going to run away with the backfield, I think it's very obviously Chase Edmonds. Now, the likelihood of that happening, I think, like for him being a 20-touch guy or whatever, I think is pretty low. But all of this is baked into his ADP, and this is the point in drafts where we're drafting our RB3 or even RB4, and you're not giving up these huge sacrifices specifically at wide receiver or even like with the early round tight end as you are with these guys in the dead zone. So I'm more willing to take risks on guys like Edmonds than guys like Jacobs or Gibson, even though their projections are probably pretty close. That gap in ADP just really makes up for it.
I think I need to bump up Edmonds a little bit. I have him at 35. He's going off the board 36, and I could see him with 15 touches a game and like 4 catches, right? Like 11. It doesn't take much to get him there. So he's definitely somebody that's on my radar. I think he's a pretty talented player, and the offensive line's improved. Another player going late, which is surprising, but I guess not that surprising considering that he's older than average for a running back. But Cordarrelle Patterson, who had a breakout season as, a 30-year-old guy. He was the fantasy RB9 for the last season, and prior to his ankle sprain week 10, he was a fantasy RB7 through the first 9 weeks. They got rid of his primary competition, which was Mike Davis, but they added Tyler Algier in the draft. And it does sound like, as a 5th-round pick, by the way, he's a bruiser. He could take some of that between the tackles work without infringing on Patterson's money touches. They did seem like they want to get Patterson involved, especially in the red zone. So this might actually be good for him on a per touch basis. And given the state of the receiving core in Atlanta, he may run even more routes than they did last year. But they did sort of weirdly go away from him as maybe their most effective player last year. But where he's going in drafts is kind of a steal, in my opinion. The offensive line's bad, so we'll get to Justin after that. After TJ has a chance to chime in on Cordarrelle Patterson. What do you think, TJ?
Yeah, I mean, I think this offense could just end up being producing no fruit. Like there's a chance that what Patterson offered last year was just kind of out of necessity after Calvin Ridley not playing and then not getting what they wanted out of Mike Davis. You mentioned Algier, but they also drafted Drake London, who can obviously cut into some of that wide receiver work. I think Kyle Pitts is just going to be an absolute beast and be the centerpiece of their offense. And then say what you will about Matt Ryan, like he gave them a chance to be a viable offense despite their lack of weapons last year. Now, whether it's Marcus Mariota or Desmond Ridder, both of those guys are guys that are going to run it as well, right? So they're probably going to take away some rushing opportunities from Patterson. So if I had to bet, I would say last year was more of an aberration than things to come. So again, going back to the opportunity cost, there's players around him that we're discussing that I would just rather have than him.
Let's talk about A.J. Dillon, who is sort of a intriguing option is he the first straight up RB2 that we're talking about here? I think he is. So,
So
great offensive line. They had some losses money-wise, Justin, but they're getting David Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins back. Although I did see a note today that Jenkins may not be ready at the start of the year, but for the meat of the season, he should be back and Bakhtiari should be back. So whatever losses they had are going to be offset there, I would think. And you have them ranked third, is that correct?
yeah, I'm still aggressive on them. They're pretty much adding back 2 of the top 5 best linemen in the league. So I mean that should be worth a lot. So they lost some stuff. They've added to their depth in the 3rd and 4th round of the draft. I am a little bit worried about Bakhtiari and Jenkins coming back soon, like preferably by week 1. They've both been rehabbing together, which I don't know if that's a positive or a negative. It seems like it would be a positive. So hopefully we hear some sort of news in the next month or so from either of them. Bakhtiari's been nursing this injury for, like 18 months now. So
yeah,
hopefully it comes back, 110%.
TJ, was Dillon one of the players you were taking over Gibson?
Yeah, absolutely. Elijah Mitchell and AJ Dillon are going right after Gibson and ADP. And I alluded to this earlier, but everybody's looking at who is going to be the pass catcher that replaces Davante Adams. And I think why not just replace Davante Adams with your 2 best weapons? And I think the Packers' 2 best weapons right now are Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. And it's not unheard of for 2 offenses to support 2 top 15 running backs. Now, Aaron Rodgers isn't just going to turn around and hand the ball off 35 times a game, but he's going to orchestrate a very efficient offense. He could do that through a wide receiver by committee, just use all of his guys to be very efficient, and then his running backs just smash through pass catching and obviously touchdown upside. And A.J. Dillon's a very underrated pass catcher. He didn't get a lot of opportunity last year as a pass catcher, but when he did, he performed very well. So I think that the Packers just end up using Dillon, as much, if not more, than any RB2 in the league. Like, this could be a situation where both of these guys go over 200 touches this year. So I love AJ Dillon as an RB2. I think you have to kind of look at this as a backfield as a whole, as an offense as a whole, and not think of AJ Dillon as an RB2, but just as their second best weapon on offense.
His workload has to increase if they are going to go with Jones. I mean, Jones's splits with Davante Adams out are insane. Yeah. As a receiver. So if they are going to, and that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're going to do for a full season. Like I preach this, that, maybe this is them trying to get through a week without Davante and that they're going to, feed Jones, but he has shown the ability to catch the ball at a very, very high level. So we might see more snaps with both running backs on the field together. And if they are going to give him Jones more receptions, then they are probably going to take a few carries away. And that means more Dillon, at least as a runner. And, another reminder on Dillon as a pass catcher, just because a player is not asked to do something in college does not mean that they can't or are incapable of doing it. So you keep that in mind when these players come out of college with almost no catches. It might just be the scheme and not necessarily the talent of the individual. I like it. I mean, I think Dillon is also a player with top 5 upside if anything were to happen to Jones. So you get a guy, and there's not that many players in the league where you get a guy who's got a weekly value. He could probably going to be a weekly starter, at least on a fringe level, and then also has that top 5 sort of upside. One more player I want to talk about for sure. Maybe we'll get into it in a couple more if you guys could stick around. But Miles Sanders, I think he's good. Justin, you have the offensive line rated first, right? Or second? Incredible offensive line, but he had 0 touchdowns last year after 6 the previous year. And maybe TJ, if you have the expected touchdown data available.
He was expected for about 5.
Okay, so it was just kind of bad luck for him. But this is a spot where you have a great offensive line, you have a talented player, but we just don't want to draft him because of previous seasons and just the way the RBC is, set up here with Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell. What do you guys think about Miles Sanders? TJ, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think his best outcome is very Devin Singletary-ish, where he's probably going to give you some very good spike games. I think this offense does have a very high range of outcomes, bringing in A.J. Brown. I mean, Jalen Hurts stunk last year, but over the first half of the season, they did want to be a passing team. Obviously, Jalen Hurts is going to take away some of that rushing upside, but I think what Miles Sanders has going for him is that before he started getting those injuries last year, over the first 7 weeks of the season or 6 weeks of the season, he was averaging 67% of the backfield touches. Then injuries, he was just back and forth on and off the field and wasn't able to regain that. But I think they want him to be the lead back. And if the offense can take that leap with Hurts, with A.J. Brown, then there is going to be touchdown opportunity. Now, is he going to get 20 touches per game? Is he score a touch? Is going to be a 15 touchdown guy? Probably not. So the frustrating thing about him is going to be trying to figure out where to start him. But I mean, getting him this late, getting him as a guy that could potentially recoup that 67% touch share, I think it's definitely worth the risk here.
Yeah, and RB3, as your RB3, it's pretty intriguing. His issue has been health, durability. But I haven't done my write-up on him yet, but he finished in the top 21 in both yards after contact per attempt and attempt per broken tackle or broken tackles per attempt. So a really solid running back. He's got receiving ability as well and a great offensive line. Justin, what do you think about that offensive line there?
I definitely think the offensive line is great. And this is a scenario where I'm kind of arguing with myself because it's not convincing me to take Miles Sanders anymore than I would if it was a bad offensive line, I guess. Yeah, I mean, kind of echoes some of the same concerns. Even though he's playing behind this great line, he ran a career low in routes. He finished 45th in targets out of all running backs, and now they have A.J. Brown in. They clearly still have Jalen Hurts to run the ball right next to him. So, yeah, I mean, he could have spike weeks if he does fall in the end zone some more, and he does have this great offensive line. So maybe this is a better and best ball play, but I don't think I've drafted him in the 20 or so underdog drafts I've done so far. So I'm sure I'll have some by the end of the year.
Usually there's receivers there that are just more appealing than these running backs.
And the tough part about Miles Sanders is if you do like the Eagles, he's kind of going around Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and Jalen Hurts. Like, they're kind of all clumped together. So if you're trying to figure out, like, I probably want the passing game instead. So that's also a difficult thing about him right now.
Yeah, I was just looking to see who else is going around that point in the draft and trying to locate the guy. Sanders. Ayuk, Christian Kirk. I guess it's not. These receivers aren't that appealing. Russell Gage is going ahead of them. Sky Moore. Wow, these are some. I'm not going to say they're reaches, but holy smokes. Tyler Lockett, though. This is not a receiver. This is not keep John on track here. This is not a receiver podcast. Last guy we're going to talk about. This will be it. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, the reason I want to talk about him is that he has a great offensive line. I think you have them second, and then you had the Eagles first, Justin. But Darrell Williams is out of the way, but they brought in Ronald Jones, who can run the ball, and we know that. And they also re-signed Jerick McKinnon, who's actually playing ahead of Edwards-Helaire in some situations late last year when Edwards-Helaire was not being productive. He was apparently coming off of a gallbladder surgery, which nobody knew about. It's right up there with the Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford's breakfasts every day news, where we didn't get it in time. What do we think about this backfield? Is this going to be, like, my inclination is this is going to be Ronald Jones probably getting a lot of first and second down carries, and then Edwards-Helaire sprinkling in on first and second down and catching the ball quite a bit, and maybe even Jerick McKinnon working in on that workload if Edwards-Helaire doesn't take a step forward efficiency wise. Justin, why don't you talk about the offensive line first and what you'd make of this backfield?
Sure, yeah. Not a lot of movement in the offseason. They added Garen Christian from Houston, and he'll just be playing a backup role. I referenced the Bills kind of just throwing a bunch of mid-level guys at the wall and seeing if they'll stick a couple of years ago. The Chiefs did this last year, and it was amazing. They finished somewhere in the top 10 by the end of last season, and that's without any of them ever taking a snap together. So I think after a whole season, and of course this entire offseason, if they all stay healthy, I mean, it's going to be a great group, and they clearly have the best quarterback in the league. So there's a lot of positives for the offense as a whole. And then CEH has Ronald Jones back there now, who is notoriously bad at in the pass game. So maybe that could be a boost for CEH in the passing game, get a little bump in targets, which gives him a little more of a floor. And obviously he's tied to this offense as a whole, and they just lost Tyreek Hill, so maybe he will find himself with some more receptions by the end of the year.
He's a former first-round pick, and those types of players tend to get more chances. TJ, what do you think of this backfield?
Yeah, before they signed Jerick McKinnon, I was willing to take the risk on CEH as the potential RB1 just because of how late he was going, because he is tied to potentially the best offense in the league. If you look at Ronald Jones last year, some of his advanced metrics were some of the worst in the league. The problem was, so were CEH's, and I was just thinking that, as you said, if they are going to give a player an opportunity, it would be the incumbent there. But with them signing Jerick McKinnon, seeing what we saw down the stretch, it's kind of feeling more like this is just going to be a true committee, a really hot hand approach. So if you're getting him, if his ADP starts to dip again because of the McKinnon signing, we see them all converging in, say, the 9th or even 10th round. I don't think we'll see an RB1 going in the 10th round, but say that the 9th round, I mean, by all means, but he's not somebody I'm going out of my way to get. I think before they got McKinnon, I got most of my shares. He wasn't one of my most drafted players in May and early June, but now I'm kind of going to let that situation settle, and I think I'm probably out on the KC backfield for the most part.
It's just interesting, this is one of the best offenses in the league, run by the second best quarterback in the league after Aaron Rodgers. But it's so tempting to have Clyde Edwards-Helaire going in the 7th round. But I'm looking at the ADP right now, and, Elijah Mitchell 70 or 71, pick 71, AJ Dillon 72, and then Edwards-Helaire 79, Miles Sanders 81, Tony Pollard 86. It does seem like there's a drop-off at the end of that 6th round where, you know what you're getting, and then all of a sudden – you don't know what you're going to get getting into the 7th, 8th round, which is sort of makes sense as the draft moves on. That's about all the time we have. Appreciate you guys spending an extra, half hour with me talking about these dead zone running backs. A lot of good information here. Hopefully we can splice this up into some videos where we, different player conversations on YouTube. But you'll see that video on YouTube, and the podcast will be up soon. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks to TJ and Justin for their insight, and we'll see you next time on 444's Fantasy Football's The Most Accurate Podcast.